When posing a character, you need to be aware of the joint limitations. As an animator, I like to use skeletal setups without joint limitations. For example, say I bend this arm. If I wanted to, I could bend it further than I should be able to bend it. Doing this can sometimes show extreme poses for very short instances, like in punches and kicks. However, you must be careful not to bend it too far so that the limbs look like they are broken. As an animator, you must have a careful eye and know how the body should move and what the body should look like as it moves. Bending it this far is obviously wrong. Let's take a look at what happens when you use joint limitations. The arm is limited so it won't rotate past 0 degrees. Now as you rotate the arm past that angle, the arm just stops. It looks like the arm is being blocked by something very hard. Ideally, the arm should ease down to a certain degree when it comes to a joint limitation. That's why I always opt to have a setup without limitations, so I can control the body exactly how I want to. And when the animation calls for extreme poses, I can do that. What do I mean by extreme poses? Let's take a look at this hand, for example. Normally, the fingers can't bend backwards further than this. If you want to push the pose to be more extreme, you would flex the fingers back even more. Now this pose is much more expressive than before. There's a certain level of intensity in a pose like this. This may be physically impossible for a hand to do, but we're talking about animation. This isn't physical therapy. Taking our poses to the next level will make your animation more stylized and unique. Here's an example of where you would use a pose like this. Say we have a character who wants to cast a magical spell. Using an extreme pose in the fingers will accent when the magical spell is cast. As you can see, the extreme pose is very quick and it doesn't last long enough for the audience to see that the fingers are broken, but it lasts long enough for the audience to notice it. If we had limits on the finger joints, we wouldn't be able to be as expressive as we are when using extreme posing. There's one area in the body where we should be careful not to be so extreme, and that is in the rib cage. Normal people can use their clavicles to hunch their shoulders over and slouch a little, or pull their shoulders back and have their chest out. But they can't bend from the mid-rib cage area, or that mid-upper chest area. The reason for that is because the vertebrae in your spine are fused in the rib cage area. That makes the rib cage firm and strong enough to protect our internal organs like our lungs and our heart. If we could fold the rib cage, we would really hurt ourselves. So when you see a setup that has a joint in the center of the rib cage, be very careful in how much you use it. If you do use it very slightly. This is what happens when you use it fully. As you can see, the chest will compress in and be stretched out. When you twist from that joint, your chest will actually shear. Rotating from that joint is very abnormal looking. If you do use that joint, use it very slightly. Here's what the rotations look like if we don't have that extra joint in the rib cage. The rotations look much more normal and the rib cage more solid. If you're worried about your character looking too stiff, don't forget about the clavicle motion. That adds a lot of flexibility to the chest area. So as you can see, I totally omit that extra bone in the rib cage area. By doing so, I don't even have to worry about it, and I also have one less bone to animate. Now let's talk about the balance of your character. If we take a look at this character, he is in the default standing position, and we know he is pretty balanced and won't fall over by himself. How do we know he is balanced? Well, it mostly has to do with the center of gravity of your character. To explain this better, let's simplify the shape of our character. If we were to take this cylinder and spin it freely in the air, where would the pivot point be in this object? It would pretty much be in the center over here. This point is the center of gravity for this object. If we point an arrow straight down from the center of gravity, we can see that the arrow goes through the base of our object. The arrow really represents gravitational pull. By seeing that, we know the object is balanced and will not fall over by itself, because the weight is centered directly above the base. Let's further illustrate center of gravity with this pose. Again, let's simplify the shape. Now if we threw this object in the air, where would it rotate from? Pretty much from this pivot spot. That is our center of gravity. If we point an arrow straight down from that center of gravity, depicting gravitational pull, we see that the arrow does not go through the base of the object, but rather in front of it. This means that most of the object's weight is in front of its base, so most likely this object will tip over. We can fix this pose to be more balanced. To do that, we have to center most of the weight above the base. So now our center of gravity is directly above the base, and this pose is now balanced and will not fall over by itself. Let's take a look at this pose. This pose has a high center of gravity. When we simplify the shape, we can see that a lot of weight is balanced on a very small shape. Although this pose is balanced, it won't take much for this object to tip over. If this character gets hit with a force going horizontally, he will most likely fall over. If we took a look at this pose, it has a very low center of gravity. When looking at the simplified shape, we see a very big base, and most of the weight is on the bottom. So it will take a huge amount of force to push this character over. Now here is a common mistake done by beginner animators when animating a character doing a somersault. Often beginners will rotate from the root, which is usually the hip bone. As you can see, this is very abnormal looking. Simplifying the shape will definitely show us that. In this pose, the center of gravity is not the root of the character. It is more in the center of the collection of arms and legs and the rest of the body. So if we rotate the character from this pivot point, the somersault looks much more natural. Now how can you easily animate this? Just parent or constrain the character to a null object and position the character so that the null object represents the center of gravity. Now all you have to do is rotate that null object. Posing a character is sort of like acting. Different poses can mean different things. That's what body language is. You are communicating through your body pose. For example, if your character is standing up straight with his chest out, then he is feeling confident or proud. If your character is hunching over with his head down, then he is feeling depressed or ashamed. If your character is hunching over with his head up, then this character could be devious or sinister or planning something evil. Take a look at these next few frames and see if you can describe what is going on between the characters and what the characters are feeling. As you can see, poses are very important in animation, whether it is a quick pose like in extreme posing or a very long pose depicting the character's feelings.